This scary situation happened to me many summers ago. At the time, I was living in low-income housing funded by the government. I had just graduated college and still did not have much money, so I was able to qualify for the small 2-story living space which I was in. The way the low-income housing was set up, there were many units in a row, sort of like a motel style, and I shared a wall with a neighbor to both my right and my left. This particular night, I had gotten off of work at 11 p.m. I got home, made something quick to eat, and then got in the shower to get ready for bed. I had only been in the shower for about 5 minutes when I heard banging at my front door downstairs. I hurriedly dried off and threw on some clothes. Then I cautiously went downstairs and approached the door. As I rounded the corner, I was hit with a bright light and told to put my hands up as a policeman pointed a gun directly towards me through the glass window on the door. Terrified, I threw my hands up and followed their orders as they told me to open the door. After they got inside, the officers had to settle me down a bit from the shock I had seeing a gun pointed at me through the door window. They went on to explain to me that they were looking for someone who was suspected in a murder. The police had received a call from a witness that the person had been seen attempting to enter units in my stretch of building, and the witness had directed the police towards my place as one of the places that the suspect had attempted to enter. The police requested to search my unit, but I was exhausted at this point and ready for bed. I assured them that I had been home for over an hour now and everything was fine in my unit. The police apologized for the scare and moved on to check the other units in my area. It was after midnight by now, and after the police encounter, I was tired and ready for bed. I fell asleep quickly that night, but then woke up in the middle of the night for what I thought at first was random. I checked my phone and saw that it was close to 3:30 a.m. As I was in bed about to drift back to sleep, I heard some odd noises coming from the bedroom across the hall. When I had first moved into this unit, I had a roommate, but they had moved out a couple of months prior, so I mostly used their bedroom for storage purposes. I went out into the hall to check it out because the noises, although quiet, were continuing. The walls were thin, so sometimes you could hear stuff the neighbors were doing through the walls. I had to pee anyways, so I went into the hallway. I still couldn't tell if the noises were coming from inside the closed door of the spare bedroom or the neighbor's wall, which was shared with that bedroom. I stood right outside of my bedroom door and said hello in my normal voice. The noises stopped immediately, persuading me that there was indeed someone or something in that spare bedroom. Remembering the whole encounter previously with police, I frantically went back into my room and locked the door. Then I immediately dialed 911. While I was on the phone with the police, I heard the bedroom door get ripped open and someone sprint down the stairs and out the back door. I never heard if the police ended up finding the suspect, but it was scary to think that I had spent the night with a potential murderer in my place. The next morning, I saw that the screen had been cut open in one of my back windows, which is how the suspect would have entered my unit. Every place that I've lived in since, I always double-check that my windows are locked before I leave. My best guess is that the suspect was going to wait out the night in that bedroom and leave after I left for work the next day, but I will never know of their true intentions or what they had been doing in the middle of the night, which was the reason for the odd noises. In high school, I would earn some extra money over the summers by house sitting. My aunt and uncle were fairly rich, so they took a lot of vacations. They had gone away on a short weekend trip, so I was house sitting for them the entire weekend. My aunt and uncle owned a couple of cats, so they always requested that I stay overnight, and I didn't mind it anyway since they had a really nice house. This particular Saturday night, it was my friend Tyler's birthday. Our friend group went out for dinner that evening, and we all wanted to hang out afterwards. I offered up my aunt and uncle's house as a place that we could hang out the rest of the night, since many people wanted to drink and party a bit, and we couldn't do it at anybody else's house due to their parents being home. It was a pretty normal night, and we played many card games and drinking games together and enjoyed celebrating Tyler's birthday. We wrapped up close to 2 a.m., and everybody began leaving. There were enough people who stayed sober, so everyone had a ride home, and nobody needed to crash at my aunt and uncle's couch for the night. I said goodbye to everybody and then headed back into the kitchen to clean up some of the cans and glasses. It felt like it had been barely 3 or 4 minutes since everybody had left that the doorbell rang. I assumed that one of my friends had forgotten something important at the house, so I went to answer the door without thinking much about it. I opened the door and was surprised to see nobody there. I was pretty drunk and didn't think too much of it, thinking my friends were playing a prank on me before leaving. Into the night darkness, I yelled, "Real funny, guys. Go home." I went back inside and then went to sleep on the couch. Later that night, I was woken up to the sound of the doorbell being repeatedly rang, about 4 or 5 times in a row very quickly. I didn't know what the time was, but I was pretty angry at being woken up, and I had a feeling that it most likely wasn't my friends ringing the doorbell. I didn't open the door this time, but peeked out the front window through the curtains. My aunt and uncle's house was in a nicer part of town, where there was a lot of space for yards and not that many streetlights. I couldn't see anybody through the window because of how dark it was. I didn't call the cops because there was a possibility that it could have been my friends, so I figured I'd better not call. I went back to sleep and didn't have any more problems for the rest of the night. The next morning, I texted my group chat of my friends and asked them if they had played a prank on me last night with ringing the doorbell. They all swore that they had not, as they all went home and went to bed. After I had cleaned up the rest of the mess from the night before, I opened the front door to leave and saw a piece of paper taped down to the door. The note said, "If you want a really fun night, leave the door unlocked next time." To me, the whole situation seemed more like a weird messed up prank by someone, but either way, it was creepy. I told my aunt and uncle about the night once they returned, and also asked not to stay overnight when I house sit for them in the future. They ended up installing a Ring doorbell camera after that, and have had no problems since that night, but I still feel uneasy sometimes if I'm house sitting for them, and I'm there while it's dark out. My husband and I have been living at this house for about 5 years now. We lived in a fairly large town, but we lived on the edge of town, so we had a larger property in a wooded area. Our property had a cabin type of vibe, with plenty of space for our dogs, 2 German Shepherds, to run around. We had neighbors close to us, maybe only 500 feet away, but there were enough trees to make us feel secluded. On this rainy Thursday night, my husband had gone to play poker with some friends, as they occasionally do, and it was at one of his buddies' houses that was about 10 minutes away. I was home alone with the dogs, watching Netflix and enjoying some ice cream. After an episode ended, it sounded like there was a break in the rain, so I got up from the couch and let the dogs out to go to the bathroom in the backyard. I would normally go out with them and stand outside, but since it was raining lightly still, I just watched the dogs through the window. The dogs do their business pretty quick most of the time, but this time, they were spending a lot of time sniffing and hovering around our old shed close to the woods in the backyard. My dogs began barking at the shed and wouldn't stop. Thinking that they had trapped an animal in or near the shed, I stepped out onto the back patio and yelled their names, ordering them to come inside. The dogs would not stop barking. I went back inside, grabbed a rain jacket, a flashlight, and put some shoes on, and then I walked out towards the shed to check out the scene. As I got closer to the shed, I noticed a horrible smell filling my nostrils. It smelled like a dead animal almost. It was that bad. As I approached the shed, shining my flashlight towards it, I got within about 20 feet, when suddenly, the door of the shed burst open, and this small, dirty-looking man jumped out. He couldn't have been much taller than 5 feet. His clothes were rags, his hair a tangled mess, and he smelled horrible. He had a shovel from our shed in his hand, and he took a couple of swings at my dogs, attempting to hit them, but thankfully he missed. He locked eyes with me for a split second, and then dropped the shovel and ran into the woods behind my house. After he had disappeared into the woods, I ran back inside, called the cops, and then called my husband, telling him to come home right away. The cops came very quickly and searched the woods area behind my house, where they ended up finding the man hiding in some brush close to my neighbor's house. My husband and I ended up finding out a couple of days later that it was a homeless man who had been squatting in people's sheds and garages around town. I'm grateful that I had the dogs there with me that night, as I'm not sure what would have happened if I had confronted the crazed man without the safety of my 2 German Shepherds. This happened many years ago when I was still in college. I was in my junior year at a large university and was rooming with 4 other people who I had met and become friends with in the dorms. We were renting this older 3-story house together that was just a bit off of campus. The house was pretty run down and not in great condition, as a lot of college houses tend to be. My friends and I didn't mind though, because the rent was cheap, splitting it between 5 people, and it was also a short walk to campus, which was nice. This particular night, it was just me in the house, as all my roommates were going out to the bars. I didn't join them in going to the bars, because I wasn't feeling it that night, and mostly just didn't usually enjoy myself at the bars. I had just wanted a relaxing night, so I was up in my room on the 3rd floor, just watching a movie and hanging out on my phone. Sometime close to midnight, I heard the stairs heading up from the 1st level creaking, and then somebody moving around on the 2nd level below me. Being an old house, you could hear a lot of floorboards creaking when somebody was moving around on a stairway or floor. When my roommates would go out to the bars, when they would come back, they'd normally be talking loudly, and I would know who was back or not. So it was odd to me that I didn't hear any talking. I had always been a bit cautious when I'd hear people downstairs, because our door was usually left unlocked. So I got up from my bed to go and see who was in the house. Our house had 2 separate stairways because of how large it was, so I stood at the top of one of them and peered down to see if I could see anybody. Whoever was down there must have heard me moving around upstairs, because they had stopped walking around and were silent. At this point, I had a feeling that there was somebody in our house who shouldn't have been there. I didn't want to call out and say anything, and I didn't want to move either, so I stood frozen out in the hallway at the top of the stairs. Eventually, after what felt like 5 minutes, the person downstairs started walking again, and I heard them begin to ascend the 2nd stairway at the other end of the hall from where I was standing. With the stairway right in front of me, I felt comfortable enough to stay and see who would emerge from the other stairway. A man who looked to be in his 50s or 60s emerged and stopped as he saw me at the end of the hall. He quickly said in a raspy voice that he used to live here and he was just checking the place out. I didn't believe him, so I told him to leave the house now or I was calling the cops. That made him angry, and he started cussing at me and moving towards me down the hall. I ran down the stairway in front of me quickly and pulled out my phone to call the cops. As I was on the phone explaining the situation, I was also playing a scary type of Ring Around the Rosie game where I could hear the man's movement based on the noise of the stairs and the floorboards. Every time the man would go up or down one stairway, I would go the opposite direction in the other stairway, and when he'd pause and stop moving, I would also stop. After a couple of times going up and down the 2 staircases avoiding him, I heard him descend to the stairs back to the 1st floor and leave through the back door of the house. The cops showed up and I described the man to them. I was informed that they would keep an eye out for him and to call right away if he ever came back. From that point out, my roommates and I did a better job always making sure that the doors were locked at all times. One of my roommates had some cash stolen from his room, but otherwise everything was in order. We lived in that house for the rest of the school year and didn't ever see that man again. Every year, the village I live in has a weekend-long festival in the fall, just to celebrate the town and have a good time. It's just sort of like a mini state fair, with a bunch of vendors tents set up, food trucks, live music, and the whole works. The festival takes place in a big park in town, which I happen to live right next to. I've lived on my own for a while now, in this place that's had some creepy events take place during the weekend of this festival. 2 years ago, on the first day of the festival, Friday night, I had been sitting out on my balcony outside of my bedroom watching the fireworks as I do every year. With plenty of light to illuminate my backyard from the fireworks, I saw a hooded figure come up the path from the park and walk down the property line between my house and my neighbor's yard. I assumed that it was somebody from the festival taking a shortcut to get home by going through people's yards. I was shocked when the hooded figure took a sharp turn into my yard and approached one of my downstairs windows and looked inside of my house. It appeared that this person didn't know I was up on the balcony as they continued around the house towards the door, which was directly under my balcony. I couldn't see them from where I was, but I heard my screen door quietly open as the person attempted to open the door. Thankfully, my door was locked. I yelled out from the balcony, using some vulgar language for them to get out of here. The hooded figure bolted from the door, ran out of my yard, and back into the park. Fast forward to exactly 1 year later to the day. I did my normal routine of going to the festival and then watched the fireworks from my balcony. The fireworks ended close to 11 p.m., and I went to bed pretty soon after that. I was woken up by the sound of my screen door opening. I quietly descended the stairs down to the living room and approached the door. From what I could tell, there was nobody there, but when I turned back around to go upstairs, I saw a hooded figure staring straight at me through the living room window. I couldn't see much, but I could tell that it was a man. What was scariest about the situation was when I saw him looking at me, he didn't flinch or duck down out of view. He simply continued to stare at me. At this point, I was truly spooked, remembering the incident from last year which happened on the same Friday night of the festival. I had my cell phone on me, and I called the police immediately as I was still standing in the living room. Once the hooded man saw I was talking to somebody on the phone, he finally dipped out of view. The cops came and didn't see anybody still around my property. I explained to them the scenario of the multiple incidents which had happened back-to-back years, and how I was convinced that it was the same person, but there wasn't really much that they could do. This year, the village festival is coming up in a couple of weeks, and I've already arranged to have a friend stay over with me at my house that night. I'm hoping that nothing will happen for the third straight year in a row, but I'm definitely on edge about it as the festival draws near.